最大震度6強もの。
福島県と宮城県で最大震度6強の非常を観測し、各地で停電も発生しました。大地を再び襲った大きな地震。
崩れ落ちてしまって、
宮城県柴田町の JR 船岡駅では
塩原市内の市営住宅です。
宮城県内では石巻市などで住宅のブロックで JNN の調べでは
ため土砂災害などに警戒。
一夜明け被害の状況も
流れた土砂は数百メートル迫れた建物もあり、骨組みがあらわになっています。折れた木や真横を向いた勢いよく土砂が崩れたか。
On 13th February 2021, a big earthquake measuring magnitude 7.3 struck Japan off the coast of Fukushima in Sendai, around the same spot as the Great Tohoku earthquake of 2011 measuring magnitude 1.0. We'll be looking in this special episode the damages caused by this earthquake and also some of the technology of how Japanese civil engineering prepares infrastructure and building, and also how Japanese people prepare for these earthquakes. And so come join us.
今回の地震は関東にも大きな影響を及ぼしました。一時およそ86万軒が停電しました。
When the earthquake struck, at the time it was about midnight, just before Valentine's Day, the 14th. Fortunately, it was night in Japan and many people were asleep or away from major trunk roads and infrastructures. However, the damage was quite severe. And a lot of news agencies around the world probably didn't show exactly the extent of the damage caused by this earthquake. Now, looking at these news reports here, you can see just how much damage that this earthquake caused by shifting a lot of ground in houses, in shops, in infrastructure such as train stations. The shaking measured in the Japanese measurement scale of shindo, which is actually how it feels, was really severe, knocking down a lot of items in the house that normally wouldn't fall down in earthquakes unless it was over a certain intensity. Glasses, bottles, just about everything, all kinds of furniture was shaking, and you can see in news reports here, the office, which always has the camera fixed in, shook violently with the television screens falling off in stations, the ceilings, the walls crack, and water is pouring out of the ceiling. On the road, geysers were caused by bursting water pipes. And this also caused a lot of blackouts throughout the city and neighboring regions in Tokyo and Yokohama. The power grids operate in such a way that not one area is concentrated for certain power flows. So this affected for several hours areas far away from the epicenter. Blackouts which caused traffic lights to go out, and traffic was not being able to go very smoothly. And worst of all, it caused heavy landslides, which is always the danger of earthquakes, covering the expressway, and also caused huge damage to Ebisu circuit. And this is something that JDM fans and car enthusiasts around the world actually did get news of and were very concerned about what has actually happened to this circuit. But we're going to be looking also at the damage caused around the area and how this has affected people's lives, and with the damages that were caused by such kind of earthquakes and how these aftershocks actually happen. So let's take a look at the location first of all. This is the Atlas of Japan, and in English, conveniently, and this is the East Coast, this is the Pacific side. Here is Fukushima, and this is Sendai. Now, the earthquake that happened on the 13th was somewhere around here. Now, this is actually not too far away from the nuclear power plants of Fukushima. Now, the earthquake that happened 10 years ago was further out into the sea, about 60 kilometers away. However, unlike the 2011 earthquake, there was no tsunamis generated, and there was no alarm for that. And the reason is that the depth of the earthquake also affected whether tsunamis are generated. Now, in the 2011 earthquake, the depth was actually very shallow, 24 kilometers. Now that's quite a lot because below the seafloor, but it's shallow enough that it actually displaced a lot of water, mass volumes of water, and rushed inland and causing huge damage, actually much more than the earthquake itself. So let's look at the structure of how tsunamis are a real danger to any kind of earthquakes around the world, whether it's in California. Now, Japan happens to be right in the center of one of the most destructive geological areas on Earth. It's called the Pacific Ring of Fire. It covers a vast ring from Japan going up to Alaska, North America going down to South America, and also on the other side near Philippines. And this is where a lot of the earthquakes happen. Now, Japan is a small island comparatively, made up of 70% landmass, which most of it actually from volcanoes. Now, to understand why earthquakes happen, we're going to be taking a little look at geography and also geology. The Earth's crust, as you'll probably know from science, is made up of different layers of the rock and minerals, and this is actually called the lithosphere, measuring about 200 kilometers long. The Earth's crust is going to be illustrated for you here very simply. Let's say this is the Earth's surface, and you have mountains, and here would be the sea, like that. And this crust, and below that is all softer, much hotter sort of materials, which actually is much hotter than the Earth's crust area here. So as these things move, it causes a lot of convection rising up into the harder surface, and this causes things to shake. Now, when an earthquake happens at a very shallow point, at around here, it actually displaces a lot of water, moving it inland. The last week's earthquake was actually at a deeper part, just for reference, just a much deeper part at 60 kilometers. So this is the reason why it didn't cause a tsunami. So, very fortunately, the earthquake didn't cause any casualties at all. Only 150 people were injured. Of course, it happened during the night, and although a lot of property was damaged due to the mass shaking, and even some people who felt the 2011 earthquake said that this time the shaking actually seemed more violent. So this is also why the Japanese government and the scientists have developed a system that's different from the magnitude of the Richter scale for measuring earthquakes. It's called shindo, which translates into a kind of a feeling, measuring from scales 1 to 6 of intensity. The Japanese weather and meteorological agency actually gives an area, as you can see here, immediately when an earthquake happens, depending on how it is felt through various sensors and machines are located around the different cities and different prefectures. This gives people an idea of what are the kind of feeling that they will be getting and what kind of damages that it could cause. It's also more realistic feeling rather than a more scientific look at the earthquake. Of course, they still use the magnitude system, which can give scientists a very clear idea on what kind of damages would actually happen. Now, interestingly, this earthquake was considered an aftershock of the 2011 earthquake. Now, if you look at geology, there are different types of earthquakes. Now, as I said, the Earth's crust is made up of different layers. Now, there are different types of earthquakes, and the one that we're interested in is the subduction type, which is the most common type of earthquakes that happen in Japan. So, the one reason why Japan is located in the Ring of Fire, it is actually caught between different plates. Now, what are plates? These are geological theories that scientists have used to determine the different areas that separate the Earth's crust, and they are subdivided into different areas with fault lines, which is basically like saying the actual surface is broken into different pieces, and these pieces are always moving against each other or apart from each other, and sometimes one is trying to go down under one another. And as explained earlier on, because the upper part of the crust is hard and the lower part is very soft with a lot of heat, it moves everything in different directions, and this happens through scale of over years and thousands or hundreds of years, and we only feel it maybe once every couple of years. But in fact, Japan has earthquakes almost every other day. Some of these are too small to be measured or felt by humans living on the surface, but they're caught by sensors, and this gives geologists and seismologists a very good idea of what these can do. And also, Japan has the world's most advanced early earthquake warning system. In fact, when an earthquake goes off, our cell phones, our mobile phones actually sound an alarm, and this gives a signal to people to immediately be prepared, maybe take cover. You shouldn't go out of your house, actually, maybe go inside a very small cubicle, such as a toilet, or if best if you have a big table, go underneath that if anything does fall. And these are drills that actually people in Japan practice when they're in elementary school since young. Big officers have hard hats and helmets, and everyone's trained in the earthquake drill and to be very, very prepared. Even the technology of houses and buildings, which we're going to be taking a look later, has been developed from Japan being very prone to earthquakes, and engineers have devised many different ways how they can actually reduce the damage and effects of seismic activity. So, most interestingly is that this was actually an aftershock. Now, scientists have explained that because the earthquake that happened in 2011 of subduction zone type, so I'm going to draw it for you. So here we have one part of the plate side view, and the crust going like this. So this is one of the plates, and the other one is actually here. Now, when these two plates try to move against each other, subduction means it goes underneath. A vibration or a fault activity actually occurs. Now, this comes as waves, which is what earthquakes are measured by. Everything is moving, but there's always an epicenter, which is the propagation point or the center point, geographically looking from top down. But what we're interested in is also the depth. This also determines whether, as I explained earlier, tsunamis will be generated or not. So the earthquake that happened in 2011 was classified as a mega earthquake, probably the worst one to happen in Japanese history, measuring magnitude 9.0. In the history of recorded earthquakes, there have only been maybe 2 or 3 of these major earthquakes. And major earthquakes that have dismayed a lot of property destruction in Japan are not the first one. Before the 2011, there was the Kobe earthquake in 1995, which destroyed most of the cities. No tsunamis were created, but the highways actually collapsed, and it caused massive destruction to buildings, and actually half toppled down. And given going years back before the World War II, the Great Kanto earthquake, 1923, that was occurred in the middle of the day, and when people were having open fires outside, and it caused huge fires. So all these lessons learned from history made the Japanese government quite prepared, but not as well prepared for tsunamis as the 2011. This earthquake this time, as scientists explain, is actually an aftershock, which means it's very strange that it occurs 10 years after, but 10 years after is actually not very uncommon for earthquakes of mega size, especially measuring of such huge magnitude. It takes years for it to actually sort of wean off, and as time passes, it gets lower and lower and lower. Some of these aftershocks can happen as kind of a post-activity from a major shock. Now, just to understand how impactful that the 2011 Tohoku earthquake caused and why these aftershocks are still occurring 10 years after, we're going to look at some facts that scientists have collected. The shock was so great that the entire island of Japan has actually moved a couple of meters eastwards, closer to America. It also caused a few centimeters of tilt on the Earth's axis, which means the Earth, which is floating like this, has actually moved a little bit, which has also in turn caused a few milliseconds in Earth's the rotation of the Earth, causing time to be actually shorter per day. But that's a really, really huge impact on the very Earth we live in. This is so great that it made the Earth's crust on that area move by the fault line, quite a huge area, and this created secondary massive ground activities, which made aftershocks come later and later. So it's interesting to see that aftershocks are still happening, even though a major earthquake has passed. Now, it's very interesting to see that even though 10 years after a major earthquake, the aftershocks are still happening. Most of these activities are actually being recorded by the scientists to study when and the next earthquake might actually come. Now, to make matters worse, scientists have long prophesied, or rather predicted, that the next major earthquake that might strike Japan is the Tokai earthquake, which was supposed to have come between 10 years ago and now, but probably that came in the form of the Tohoku earthquake. We don't know. Now, what's interesting is that the aftershock this time measured in quite a high magnitude, and scientists have actually warned that more earthquakes or aftershocks would come. And in fact, just 2 days later, another aftershock happened in the south near Kobe, and just 2 or 3 days ago, on the 20th, one happened in Hokkaido. Now that area actually gets a lot of movement, but the Japanese people are very well prepared for such things, and the infrastructure of buildings is something that has been in development for over 30 years. Now let's look at this little short video clip where you can see huge buildings actually have massive rubber dampers at the base, at the core. So when earthquakes happen and the movement actually moves underneath the building, rubber absorbs all of the impact and stabilizing the movements of the building on top, so it reduces the shaking. Now if you're at a higher position, of course, you're going to feel more of the pendulum movement, making shaking very, very severe. Another special technology, as you can see here, is a special rotation device with special plates that can move in any direction, absorbing the movements of the earth up or down. In houses, mostly made of wood in Japan, such kind of structures are also being used, when the most important is actually in the walls, where a cross beam, very much like a strut brace on a car, is being used to hold and the integrity of the structure better, rather than having only 4 square corners. Forces move the housing rocking back and forth, it would actually make it collapse. And the measures that Japanese do take in the house is actually to secure all of their furniture, such as tall bookshelves or cabinets with a bracket to the wall so that it doesn't fall down. And everyone in the house has an emergency pack filled with all kinds of lifeline equipment and supplies, such as dried food, extra water, a warming towel or a blanket, a radio, because when electricity is cut due to damage to power supply, you can't watch your TV. And maybe these days it's also interesting to use a power generator with a huge battery pack, and some people even have these kits and put it in their car, so if they are outside, they can take refuge outside very easily. And Japanese kids are also trained right from primary school or elementary school how to deal with earthquakes. And the best thing you should do when an earthquake comes is to run and hide underneath a structure, such as a big table, or the more small and tight place, which is usually the toilet in the house. Do not run out of your house, because things from outside, such as falling windows or awnings on the roof, can actually fall. You're actually safer inside the house. Move away maybe from large structures like your furniture or any kind of glass cabinet which has pots or plates or glasses, you don't want it to fall on you. Maybe the bedroom would be the safest because you don't have much things inside. But it's always best to remain calm and understand that the earthquake is happening and that you should move to a safe area. Now, of course, if you do come to Japan, it's probably going to affect you or shock you the first time if you do sense some kind of shaking. Is it safe for you to come to Japan? Yes, it is, because these actually don't happen very, very often. I've been in Japan for 15 over years, and the 3 most biggest earthquakes are the ones that happened last time, in 2011, and there's one more which really made a huge movement. But other than that, in the Tokyo-Yokohama area, most earthquakes would last only a few seconds. The earthquake that happened on the 13th actually lasted 15 seconds, which was pale in comparison to 6 minutes that happened in the Tokyo earthquake. It was very distressing, of course, because I could feel that it wasn't normal due to the slow shaking rather than fast shaking types, and this really affected my ability to actually think properly, taking the shock. But I was actually calm enough to be able to think about the next thing to do. I looked around my house and see, okay, are these guys falling? If the earthquake is big enough to make all these things fall, then it's probably time to take evasive action. So personally, I do put around my house things that are in varying degrees easy to be toppled, so I could actually gauge whether the earthquake is really strong or not. I also live on the first floor, which actually helps a lot. But still, you know, even though I wasn't very, very surprised by it, there was still a little bit of sense of worriness, because what if this actually turns out to be a huge earthquake like more than 10 years ago? My girlfriend, who is Japanese, was really, really very calm. And she said, oh yeah, this happens all the time. And that's to the extent of how a lot of Japanese are actually very well prepared for earthquakes. So in closing, for those of you who think, well, Japan is disaster-ridden, you've got typhoons, yes, it's true, but there's so much here to enjoy that you wouldn't want to miss, like the beautiful view of Mount Fuji, the beautiful nature, the food, and all the iconic places, especially if you like JDM cars and all the different locations, the culture. It just makes it worthwhile to visit. But if something does happen, take this guide to prepare yourself for what to do. So until next time, guys, peace out.